All right, folks, I think we can kick off. I'm going to keep admitting people as they enter. Welcome. So thrilled to have you. Happy Thursday, everyone. My name is Rachel Lieblein-Gervala. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the programs manager at the Spencer Educational Foundation. For those of you who may be less familiar with the foundation, we are dedicated to funding the education of tomorrow's risk management and insurance leaders. And we are so excited to offer this webinar series as a free opportunity for current students and recent graduates to connect with and learn from a host of incredible industry professionals, to get exposure to a broad range of risk management and insurance related topics, and to connect with peers and to-be colleagues from across the country, which leads me to a couple of housekeeping points before we kick off today's session on reputational risk management. The first being, again, I know I've said it a couple of times at this point, but please feel free to write in the chat where you're calling in from and your university or organization so we can meet you all. The second piece is that this meeting is being recorded, so it will be posted on Spencer's website probably early next week. So if you want to go back and reference any information or share the session with a friend, feel free to do so. Third thing, I know we all know this website. I'm just going to mute. Perfect. Beautiful. Thanks, Riley. If you haven't muted yourself, please do so now. That would be fantastic. And I'll monitor that as well. And last thing, if you have questions, comments throughout the session today, we know that we're all zoomed out. We've been in meetings, we've been in webinars for a very long time at this point. So please feel free to use the chat function to make this interesting for yourself. Reach out to your peers and colleagues in the room and ask any questions throughout the session. And with that, I'm very excited to welcome Dave Poston and Meg Paquin from Poston Communications for their session today. I'll give each a brief introduction before I pass the floor over. So Dave Poston, Esquire, is the Chief Executive Officer and General Counsel at Poston Communications. Dave is a licensed attorney with an extensive background in public relations and marketing. He's held numerous international positions for law and other professional service firms, and throughout his career has developed media opportunities for his clients and employers in a host of important international media and trade publications. He's worked with clients ranging from law to construction to technology to architecture. I'm sure he's got a lot more to share for us. And Megan Paquin is our second presenter today. She is the Vice President at Poston Communications. She has led communication strategies for some of the world's most respected brands, including experience in the healthcare, technology, education, nonprofit, hospitality, and entertainment sectors. She has extensive experience in crisis management and litigation communications, counseling clients to plan for and respond to critical issues from data breaches to natural disasters to even organized crime. So with that, Dave and Megan, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time and expertise with us. We're so excited for your session today.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. That was such a kind introduction, and it's so great to see you all today. We appreciate the warm welcome. And as you all know, risk management really encompasses this broad range of skills to meet the evolving needs of businesses in today's market. And a lot of traditional risk management and much of how we address business management just in general has really been focused on financial outcomes and, identifying these potential threats to a company's capital, earnings, and doing what we can to mitigate those threats through various strategies and decision-making processes. But there's really this growing movement, and I'm sure a lot of you in your internships and your careers as they progress will feel this too. And that movement is that reputational risk is just as critical to an organization's bottom line as those financial assets. So today we really want to share our insight into the reputational landscape, and our goal is to help you carve out a competitive advantage by considering reputational risk management as really mission critical to your practice. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Dave, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about why we think this way and how you can start to join us in that.
Well, it might help you to know that about 75% of our clients are legal departments and their law firms. So our approach is very aligned with the work that you all do, and we understand how there's variations with regarding risk and how that's separated from legal or combined with legal, and communications in different companies and organizations. And so, like Megan said, our approach really comes from a new perspective on business today. And this headline really kind of shares it all, if you will. A couple years ago in the Business Roundtable, a bunch of CEOs, about 200 from the world's largest organizations, came together and basically said that shareholder value is not the be-all end-all anymore. That we really needed to look at all of our audiences and all of our constituencies and really serve all of them, perhaps even equally. And this is especially true because we have a very skeptical public these days, a very informed public, and one that can be pretty tough on companies and hold them to a pretty high standard. So when we think about all those audiences, it's not just, companies, clients and shareholders, but it's also communities that they serve, and perhaps even as big as the countries that they serve. And so a couple of years after that, Harvard Business Review sort of dubbed this stakeholder capitalism or the stakeholder era. So let's take a look at this concept in action. You all probably saw Peloton go through something recently. We wanted to share a little video with you. Megan, I'm having trouble with, yep. We could tell the sound wasn't coming through, so we're working on that for a second here.
Megan, you might need to unmute yourself for us to
do so. Last month, the federal regulators had warned Peloton that their Peloton Tread Plus machines were a danger to children and pets after a 6-year-old child died and dozens of others were hurt. Consumer investigative reporter Anna Werner spoke with the father of one injured child.
Her leg got pulled underneath the actual treadmill, and it dragged her under.
In October last year, Brandon Ratliff says his 5-year-old daughter Jocelyn got pinned under the family's Tread Plus treadmill, abrading the skin on her leg. Had he not been there to pull her out, he says,
and I think it probably would have taken her entire body under.
What was this like?
I mean, it was terrifying.
Video of this 2-year-old boy in Northern Virginia also being dragged under the 455-pound treadmill alarmed parents. This boy survived, but in April, regulators warned consumers with children to stop using the machine. At the time, Peloton's CEO said he had no intention of recalling the treadmill. But in a statement Wednesday, John Foley said Peloton made a mistake in our initial response to the Consumer Product Safety Commission's request that we recall the Tread Plus. We should have engaged more productively with them from the outset. For that, I apologize. The CPSC says there have been other incidents similar to this one, with some children seriously injured. One 6-year-old girl died. There have been more than 70 incidents to date. Joe Martiak is the commission's spokesperson.
Is it true that the agency was getting ready to sue them?
We were looking at all of our options, and on something that we consider very serious, if we can't get a voluntary recall, we put on the table internally consideration of going to court and getting a mandatory recall.
The company sold some 125,000 of the Tread Plus treadmills, and they will give full refunds now to customers through November 6th of 2022, Gail.
All right, Ann, I was sorry to hear that because I haven't, it's a great machine, but clearly there are some issues there. I wasn't worried about it until my niece came to visit and she has a little dog, Chickpea. I said, keep Chickpea out of the room. But now it's a very serious thing. I'm glad they're acknowledging we got some issues. They got to fix that.
That video is so just.
All right, so I know that we can see you all and you are muted, but I wanted to ask if anybody has any reactions from
sorry that it's causing that kind of
hearing this before,
thank you.
or any reactions to what you heard before about Peloton reversing their position, or anything you feel you could share after seeing this video?
To be honest with you, Dave, I'm a little surprised that the CEO wasn't looking into it further and a possible recall or anything like that, because obviously that video you just showed was very graphic and very horrifying.
Yes, definitely agree. Any comments on the reversal and how that you think that might have impacted a stakeholder's feelings about the company? Well, it's very interesting. We'll share with you that CNBC reported this week that Peloton's struggles are overblown and investors should buy the dip, expecting shares to rebound by more than 30%. But as you know, reputational risk often comes in crises like these, and you do a lot of work and will be doing a lot of work to prevent us getting to these types of situations. But managing these risks often comes down to crisis communication, reputation management. So we'll use the term crisis here out in this presentation, but it sort of covers all of the different approaches, if you will. We'll try to distinguish some along the way. And Megan will share a little bit more now about how we define crisis after having seen the situation.
Yes, and thanks for bearing with me there as the video DJ. So to ask you all another question, what do you think about when you hear the word crisis? What kind of images or thoughts immediately come to mind?
I tend to think of like a very serious situation, something severe, or at least with the appearance of severity involved in it.
Great. Anybody else?
Just chaos.
There's definitely that feeling. Any others? I remember when I first started practicing public relations and I was hearing about this phenomenon of crisis communication, and I would always tend to think about buildings on fire or explosions or just these crazy things that would happen that you only ever see on the 5 o'clock news, maybe once in a lifetime. But really, and more, crises tend to be a lot more mundane sometimes. Sometimes it's these small issues that suddenly become very chaotic or very serious in nature, as Brandon shared. And so I wanted to share this definition with you from the Institute of Crisis Management. And you can see how they describe crises as significantly broad. So a business disruption that, on the communication side is maybe stimulating extensive news coverage. If something is still a crisis inside of your organization, maybe the public doesn't know about it, you might think about that news coverage as like the water cooler talk or the buzz that you're hearing among colleagues or frustrations that are being reported. And that public or internal scrutiny really has a big effect on an organization's normal operations. Again, think about that feeling of chaos and not really knowing what's going on, and how does that affect every other aspect of the business? And of course, public relations or crises, because of that, even if it is a mundane issue or a building on fire, they can really have a political, legal, financial, or operational impact on the business as a whole. And generally what we see in crises is that they tend to occur from an organizational setting as a result of management action, or more often management inaction. So our colleagues at PwC, they're a huge accounting firm. They annually survey C-suite leaders around the world about crisis management trends, and I always find their research very helpful. So if this is a topic that you're really interested in exploring further, can't recommend their global survey enough. And here you can really see the broad categories that describe organizational crises. And I'll just note that this data is from 2019 because, of course, what was 2020? All COVID, all the time. And what is an interesting note here for today's conversation is the way they break out reputational crises. You can see here that they're really considering them only about 20%. But if we think back to the Peloton crisis, that hit on numerous categories, right? It was clearly operational. There's a product issue. It's legal. Was the Consumer Product Safety Commission considering suing them? What are some other ways that you could categorize that crisis?
Financial as well, like loss of business.
Absolutely. I don't think they're actually selling the Tread Plus right now. So I'm sure they had hoped that they'd continue to sell them the way they were in 2020. Any others?
Moral.
It's a great point, especially when you consider that we're in this stakeholder era. Who determines what is right and wrong? Is it the CEOs of the company? Is it the Consumer Product Safety Commission? Or is it the stakeholders? And then, of course, clearly reputational. A lot of clients want the opportunity to be on Good Morning America or CBS Sunday Morning, but not maybe for the reasons that we saw earlier. And as risk managers, you know that these risks, they aren't always black and white, right? Crises also can often become layered and multifaceted. So it's not uncommon at all, like we saw in the Peloton case, for an operational issue to very quickly spiral into a crisis within each one of these categories, sometimes really all at the same time. And in today's hyper-connected, really social world, most, if not all, crises will have costly reputational effects. So it'll be interesting over time to see how our colleagues at PwC start to grow that area of reputational risk. Excuse me. Here's another example that you might all remember. Does anybody or had anyone seen the cinnamon toast shrimp crisis? I see some laughs.
I do remember that.
It was good for a giggle, right? So for those who weren't aware, a couple months ago, I think, there was a comedian that posted he'd found a really strange assortment of items, including some alleged shrimp tails in a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal, and he had pictures, and the tweets really went viral because he was posting his interactions via DM that he was having with the brand, and those interactions were super cringeworthy, right? So the super social media representatives really seemed to not take the issue seriously. They even tried to accuse the comedian of lying. At one point, they told him he should take the box into the local police station, and he was like, what, should I be waving it around like a smoking gun, or how does this work? And whether or not, right, he was a comedian, whether or not the social media team thought, okay, this guy's playing a prank on us and we don't want to take it seriously, their lack of response and lack of thinking about how this potentially product issue or minor viral social media moment could become a major issue for their company was really reflected in the days later as the tweets went viral and people really started to express concern about what was in their product. And so the statement that you see on the screen here, this was actually posted more than several days later. I like to say it's when legal or maybe the risk management team entered the chat. And unfortunately, it had already been so many days since this story had emerged that the damage is really done. And to my knowledge, there has been no resolution to date. I don't know if anyone has followed Cinnamon Toast Crunch and has seen an update. But where that leaves us from a risk management perspective is potentially we've left this reputational risk out there in the world. There's potentially millions of cereal consumers still left wondering whether and how shrimp tails could have made it into a cereal box. And imagine what would happen the next time someone claims to find something unwanted in their box of cereal. Could a class action lawsuit be filed? Would the plaintiff's attorney only need to look at the lack of response here to make their case? Potentially. So as a risk manager, you would want to think, even if you've gotten to this point and something has gone so viral and there has been a response, where do we take it from here? How do we mitigate this potential future risk from occurring? And this scenario, unfortunately, is not uncommon at all. Many organizations really look to stop the conversation about a crisis, but fail to fully address it internally and externally. And like I said, putting a Band-Aid on a crisis like this is really just another crisis or risk waiting to happen. So how do we become better reputational risk managers? Well, it's all about crisis preparedness. And generally, crises can be categorized in 4 different ways. So you have a direct crisis. This is something that is affecting us right now, our organization. An indirect crisis may affect our competitors, our partners, industry, society as a whole. And then the other facets are, is it public? Does everybody know about this? Or could they come to know about this? Or is it private? Is it an internal issue, or is it likely to remain internal to the company over time? And as an example, COVID for most organizations, we would say was a direct public crisis, but it's also an example of a catalyst for crisis. That is one trigger event that reveals many other potential crises and issues. So for some organizations, COVID also created a number of direct and indirect public and private issues that would need to be dealt with. Many were not even COVID related. So no matter how you define the crisis of the moment, we all play a role in it. And the first line of defense in that is really open and transparent communication. So in our field, we like to talk a lot about issues management, which is the practice of anticipating crises that are sort of simmering underneath the surface before they can boil over. Excuse me, my allergies are with me today. And so the best case scenario that we can all do in our roles, entry level to the CEO, is to really raise a flag for those issues that we hope will never turn into a crisis. But we want to make sure that our leadership teams are aware of it. So even if you've seen an issue be handled, like cinnamon toast shrimp, would it behoove you to go to your manager and say, hey, I see we did this, but what can we learn from it? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again? Or how can we prepare for the next time? Really helping serve as your organization's eyes and ears in your local community and industry groups is another way to prevent or help manage a crisis. So this is really thinking about those indirect crises. Could an issue that's affecting your competitor become an opportunity for you? Absolutely. Could an issue affecting one of your suppliers become a risk for you? Absolutely. And of course, there's associations like RIMS and here in Spencer that provide ample opportunities for you to learn from other risk managers about these emerging risks, and also to talk to each other candidly about how they manage them and the simultaneous reputational threats. We see a lot of those great conversations happening in these communities. And it's important that we're open with each other about how to solve them, especially when you start to get into really big societal issues that stakeholders are generally concerned about. So to that end, one of the leading concerns that we hear from CEOs and even PwC reports in their survey is they worry a lot about how they're going to get the information they need to be able to make decisions and communicate those decisions to the public. So you can really be a hero to an organization in crisis by making it easy to get that information, by having it on hand, readily accessible, and insights that are practical that you can share. And then finally, as someone else said, chaos, right? Crises tend to upend our lives in ways we just really could never expect. And I don't have to really tell a group of aspiring risk managers that the most mundane issues, right, or these little fires can become a nuisance so quickly. So it's important for us to also maintain a flexible posture and to stay focused on collaboration. So this is really where the reputational part comes in. Even though you might be dealing with a risk that to you feels very mundane, we've seen this, we've prepared for it, we've got the coverage to handle it, there may be reputational effects that need to be considered a little bit more flexibly. We may need to address something a little bit more empathetically to a public than we would to a board, and your insight and preparedness can help your CEOs and your communications leaders be able to really do that. So now I'm going to give my voice a break and keep you from hearing me cough. And Dave's going to talk about how you can analyze potential crisis for reputational risks.
So as risk managers, there's lots of different models that you would use, and we really also approach our work as crisis communicators from a sort of academic way, if you will. We've talked a little bit about how crisis communicators identify and try to prevent risk, just like you do. We also try to prevent and then manage risk, much like you and legal would do. We certainly see crisis as an opportunity, and that seems completely sort of an antithesis of looking at risk, but we see risk even as an opportunity, depending on how it's managed, how it's predicted, and how leadership responds. Another key component to this whole reputation and brand conversation is how do you measure brand and reputation? And we're not going to cover that today, but we wanted to get into a little bit about the analysis of reputation for you here as well. And there's really a couple ways we're going to approach the question of how do you know whether or not reputation is really on the line for an organization. And we sort of look at it two ways. First is stakeholders, and then second is sort of newsworthiness is the model we're going to use today for you. So very importantly, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but your stakeholders are quite broad. Remembering that businesses now look beyond shareholders, there are many, many audiences or stakeholders that you need to think about. So Megan's mentioned internal a couple times, communicating to different types of internal audiences differently. External, it's not just clients, but it's also vendors or people that are your partners and work alongside you. Certainly competitors externally is something to consider, or community organizations. We oftentimes work closely with law enforcement and other governmental entities. And of course, finally, the public or community at large. And so then one of the ways that we present here is the 7 elements of newsworthiness. And these are actually things that news editorial teams sort of look at. And these are sort of 7 things that we see. The impact of the event, so like a burning building, timeliness, is it happening right now, or is it something that's about to happen? The proximity to the people that are dealing with the situation, human interest. It's the classic babies and dogs, as you saw in the Peloton. They use the children as an enhancement to the story. News is conflict. Risk is conflict, and law is conflict. So that's a wonderful thing to sort of understand how that through line between your work and our work and legal work. The bizarre obviously is very interesting. Bizarre can be things like injuries, like that was also used in the news piece that you saw a second ago. And then of course, celebrity always helps. All right, so our organization, our agency represents the Association of Corporate Counsel Georgia chapter, and this is about 1,000 in-house legal professionals, and we just did a survey with them together where we looked at the integration between legal departments and comms departments, and we could have done one where we looked at the intersection between comms and risk departments. But important survey statistic to share with you is that the legal departments believed, 90% of them believed they were responsible for maintaining a corporate reputation. So in the olden days, lawyers were simply trying to push the negative away or deal with the negative situation, but now they are being more and more proactive. And that's what I think you all are here today sort of doing as well, putting all the pieces together in your proactive management of risk. And then on the next slide, the other good news part of this is that the legal departments that we surveyed shared that 82% of them attribute a successful outcome to corporate communications and legal departments working together. Now, we could tell you all kinds of things about the additional questions that we asked about how do you do this, and how much are you going out and engaging. And unfortunately, while they all knew these 2 things, the actual process is a real challenge still. Silos of departments and corporations and organizations is a risk in and of itself, right? And so figuring out ways to breach that gulf and bring people together so that the risk can truly be managed is the ultimate goal and the purpose of us sharing that with you here now. So what does this mean? It basically means just like the requirement to assess, identify, and manage risk needs to come from the top, so does communication need to be a leadership imperative. And, here's a great example of this. We turn back to the PwC survey for you here, and 2 things from PwC's Global Crisis Research. Effective communication and collaboration cannot be emphasized enough. And CEOs also emphasize that their ability to gather information quickly and then communicate it back to stakeholders in the way that they can either add to it or enhance it or direct it is the most important part for managing crisis to CEOs. In our work, we use sort of a typical 3-point sort of model, if you will. We change the end of this, though, because we, with our legal and risk focus, bring in a legal term of advocate here. Lawyers advocate on behalf of their clients. They swear an oath to do so, and to do so well. So when prevention hasn't worked, which is what we all try to do, plan and prevent, and the reputation is on the line, we believe strategic comms is the way to answer and mitigate the risks going forward. We work alongside risk managers, executive leadership, legal counsel. This three-step process gets everybody on the same page. A lot of times we're brought in at the response phase, and then we have to sort of move to advocacy, but then we can return to planning for the next go round, the next risk that could be faced. And ultimately, the goal of comms is to mitigate risk completely. Here's a deeper dive that goes into the deliverables that we would provide and what you should seek from your comms teams at your organizations. These are, if you will, it's almost like a table of contents in a crisis and risk management plan. We break these aspects of the comms plan down into actionable steps. And while it seems like a lot and a daunting task to kind of pull all this together, we see this as continuous and proactive. It's got to be a part of a company's culture, just like managing risk, and to build resilience and maintain reputation. Over time, we add elements just like you would to an enterprise risk management plan, and continually test the overall response, but also retest and test messaging. Just like you saw Peloton shift, they were essentially testing and then retesting new messaging until they got to a place where their risk was more mitigated. Yes, so resilience and reputation is a competitive advantage. We oftentimes tell our clients, the more work you can do in advance to build your reputation, share what you're doing for the community, share your focus on safety, share your focus on product testing, tell that you care about your employees, stakeholders, communities, et cetera. The better bucket of strength and wealth that you can lean on going forward when you face a risk. PwC found in 20% of those surveyed said they were in a better position after the pandemic than before. Well, in some ways, they've all responded. They've been open, they've been vulnerable, they've improved their ability to manage risk in crisis, because really everyone became a risk and crisis manager for that last year. They drilled down and said that those who reported strength in brand value and organizational resilience had performed communications-oriented tasks. The ones who had plans did better. The ones who had designated crisis and business continuity teams did better. And the ones that had risk managers did even better. So it was really great to see that about your community. And then finally, and really I think that what a lot of people are going through right now is sort of a review and assessment of how did we do. A lot of things have happened. A lot of things need to be followed up on. There's risks that are continuing now as you see anniversaries for horrible incidents, or as people go back to the office, and there's going to be some outcoming litigation from some of that. And so looking forward to, the reputation and risk management journey that's ahead is what I think a lot of organizations seem to be doing right now. We survived. What's next? All right, so here's one more example for you, and we wanted to just share good old Ben & Jerry's, which takes a very community-oriented approach to product development, all of their comms, their overall culture. In this example, we're talking about social justice, and as you can have seen, a lot of companies, voting rights legislation is a perfect example, have been called upon to take stances. And that is a development that over time has been used where people who aren't able to achieve action through the government then turn to companies and call on them for action. But the example we're sharing is that Ben & Jerry's was even before that had done something unique, which they had sort of done a listening tour and asked their clients and customers and their people internally and externally, what do they think that we should do with regards to some of these things? What is our mission and our values? How does that align with our reputation? What stances should we take? So by simply communicating with their organizations, Ben & Jerry's did really, really well with their reputation. It aligned with their history and their past performance on reputation and culture. And they didn't really face any whistleblowing and other issues that a lot of other companies faced. So one way that, that lesson is just to sort of remember the brand, and they carried it through in their action, even in something that had nothing to do with ice cream.
Dave, I think we have a hand raised from Derek. Derek, if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to ask any questions you may have.
Yeah, doesn't this like Ben & Jerry's and other companies taking such a proactive stance also opens them up to criticism if they were using certain, labor from China that's not ethical? So it doesn't, like, if you're such a strong, if you're like, all right, like we're so against, we want equal rights for all, and meanwhile certain company engages in certain practices, it opens up to, it makes them look like a hypocrite and puts a bigger target on their back.
It's a great question. One of the ways that we approach that type of question with our clients is that effort is as much as some of the actions that you've taken. So, and Megan has some sort of scientific phrases that she would use regards to crisis communications on this, but acknowledgement and effort can move you forward. And I'll just say a couple more things before Megan has some probably great things to say. For our legal clients, there's this philosophy from when the law industry was founded in the United States that everyone deserves legal representation. So if you have a diversity policy as a law firm, but you have a company that has done some things that may be considered pretty horrible from that perspective, how do you align those two? And when and where do you draw the line with your mission and values as an organization? And I'm seeing a global shift in terms of all of this as a risk analysis kind of thing. But Megan, what would you say?
And I just think this is such a great point of where risk managers can come into the conversation. So, it's a good time to tell you not every communicator communicates in this way or has experience with stakeholder capitalism and stakeholder values. And so perhaps as an example, you might have a corporate communications team that says, we're going to make a statement about Black Lives Matter because that's important to us and that's what's trending in the news. And maybe your job as the risk manager is to say, that's awesome. We're really excited that you feel that way. I want to make you aware of some potential things that could go wrong or some things that you might not know about that we are dealing with on this side of the business that we should take into account before we make that big decision. And that's really where a lot of brands went wrong in that. And, effort, yes, definitely should be applauded, but we want to make sure in this time of hyperconnectedness and stakeholder capitalism and people really being skeptical about companies and looking to companies for direction, that we're taking a collaborative approach and that we're really looking across the organization for insights that help us determine not only where we want to be, but all of the steps we have to take to get there.
Yeah, it's such a great question, because one of the pieces of advice that we give to folks when we're working with them is to make a list of all the potential scenarios that they could be exposed to and order those and just start dealing with them almost one at a time if you can. The methods of dealing with them can be the same, but you've really got to sort of establish that priority, much like you would in risk management. Pick the priorities and start to work your way down. But there is another element, there's another layer, which is about being an open, communicative organization. And we have clients that are completely scared of the media and bottled up. We try to open them up. We try to get them to share and speak about their leadership philosophies, their efforts, things like that. And the same is true internally. A lot of times Megan, I think, alluded to this earlier, we talk about the gossip line in an organization. You've just got to share with people what you're trying to do and your empathy, your humility, and things like that. And quite frankly, this global system of capitalism created all these tentacles that we're now working at to try to figure out. So there is no hypocrisy. It's a big, complicated problem. Okay, so we wanted to sort of get to the end by sharing with you a few other sort of little tiny nuts and bolts that you might find interesting about the relationship between crisis communications and reputation management, and then enterprise risk and legal risks. And these are very sort of basic sounding, but we want you to hear them. So insurance companies, for example, have what they call legal panels, where law firms are pre-approved to work with these insurance companies. It's a big, complicated system. But what's interesting to share with you is that insurance companies also have that for crisis communications agencies. They have lists of crisis comm agencies that insurance companies let their clients work with immediately and quickly. So that part of the world is out there. But you also may or may not know that insurance companies are writing crisis comms and reputation risk management into their policies as well. So in cybersecurity, there's specific riders about if you face an incident, we'll cover a portion of your cost to work with a crisis communicator, because insurance companies know that comms will reduce the exposure for the companies. And lawyers more and more are partnering with crisis comm agencies and using that as a way to gain new business even, as well as deliver their services, but are using a partnership with a crisis agency to pitch clients about their approach of handling legal risk and overall risk in team and in tandem with a reputation person. The last thing to sort of say is oftentimes one of our jobs is to circle the wagon. So if you look at this PwC chart again, all the different departments involved here, many, many times, one of the first things we're doing is you've got to bring risk manager, you've got to bring an HR person, you've got to bring a legal person to the phone so we can all get on the same page. And it's similar to when you have a crisis reputation risk management plan, and then you use that plan to reach back out to all these groups with the messaging and other things you're going to use. Well, that was pretty much all the things that we wanted to present today. Was there anything that we haven't covered you'd like to ask about, or anything you'd like to ask about that we did cover?
Yeah, Dave, I do have a question about breaking down the different departmental silos. What are some good suggestions activity-wise, or maybe beyond that you would recommend to kind of do so?
Megan, I'll start and then you can contribute. So one of the things is really understanding some of the institutional barriers that might exist that would be unexpected. For example, a lawyer or legal department is often afraid to bring in an internal comms team for purposes of attorney-client privilege or work product doctrine. So that is a very unique thing that it prevents interaction between legal and comms, and perhaps even legal and risk. Investor relations communications person is going to have these specific requirements of things that they're going to have to do. So understanding some of the job responsibilities and requirements is sort of critical. And really, we can go into it, but ultimately you've got to identify those for yourself, and then you can sort of mirror or reflect back to the other side and start to share. So you've got to learn how to figure out what they are, make a plan for overcoming them, and educating each other and figuring out a way to work together. But Megan, I'll let you go next, and then we can go into specifics we heard at the ACC Georgia.
I really love tabletop exercises, especially not as much for the purpose of exercising your plan as much as guiding discussion. So giving everybody that dedicated time and space to be a contributor to the risk management and crisis management process, and really hearing them out and hearing how they respond to different scenarios, I think is a really great way that you can start to get to know those folks and start to really think like them and to integrate them into your process. A lot of times, for communicators, we hear about an issue once it's already become a problem, but we're so relieved to know that on your side, you've been working on it for maybe years and you've got a wealth of information that we can access. There's no reason to not include other members of your team in that process of understanding that information, or even just simply how you work, so that they can contribute to it and you can start to naturally network in that way. But tabletops are a really great way to just start that process and get everybody on the same page.
I'll just give you two other things that were mentioned in the ACC work that we did. One was to identify a dedicated person. So, go ahead and understand the organizational structure of each department, and then just assign sort of like a liaison, if you will, between the two. The next thing to do is sort of make sure that you meet not in a crisis situation. Really go ahead and, even if you don't know what the agenda might be, go ahead and take action to move forward outside of a stressful environment that would put someone you're trying to engage with worried that you were going to get in their way or not help them or do something like that. The third thing I'll say is some people are supposed to say no in their jobs, in their minds, and some people are supposed to say yes. So comms and marketing people are typically wanting to share and sell and get the company out there. Legal is trying to close the door and keep it quiet. Risk is just trying to give information so everybody can do their job in some ways. Do you know what I mean? And so understanding where people are coming from and then helping them move from yes to no, or vice versa.
We have a great mantra of thinking about how we move from not what we can't do to how we can do something.
Great. Looks like we have a hand up from Ryan.
Hi. Yeah, I think my camera is going through a crisis right now, unfortunately, but
understandable.
But I'm a Gallagher intern at the DC Metro branch, and I was wondering, as risk managers, it seems like you can evaluate both negatives and positives in terms of opening communication to the public with potential crises. Like, for example, cinnamon toast shrimp, I felt like it, as an observer, I felt like it escalated on account of continuing interactions between, this comedian and the company. So I was wondering, as risk managers, how do you evaluate continuing or stopping communication with the public as increasing or decreasing risk?
That's a great question. And it's a good way to also evaluate how you work with a communications team. So like, as Dave mentioned, marketers, communicators, salespeople, we tend to be yes people. But in crisis, you want someone who's confident to say no, or to be able to prioritize how information goes out. So in a case like cinnamon toast shrimp, your advice might be, we have to handle this now with this person. And that was the problem, I think, in that situation, where they were trying to do it, but they weren't taking the conversation offline. They continued to do it in a way that was public. And you kind of have to get to a point where with those teams, you have an escalation protocol so that they can say, okay, I've DM'd this person 3 times and this conversation is either increasing in volatility or I'm not getting the response I need. And so I need to loop in somebody from this other team who can then evaluate it and decide what to do. And really what we end up seeing is a lot of people trying to just handle it on their own and not taking that team approach, or feeling like you've got to move so fast in today's world to address something that you don't have time to stop and take a moment to think. And that time is so critical. So, it's really on a case-by-case basis, but some of the things we look for are, those 7 elements excuse me, of newsworthiness. And are they present in the issue that we're facing? Are there multiple facets or multiple elements there that are all increasing the potential for this to become further escalated and more public? And then whether or not you communicate about that to the public could largely depend on proximity, timeliness, impact. If it's an internal issue that's gone public, maybe you need to tell the public what you're doing, but the heavy lifting is really going to be internal stuff that they never see.
Well, and we always advise people to take something that was detrimental to the organization, and if they reacted wisely and took proper steps, don't ever be afraid of it being a part of your history, and anticipate and don't be put off by the fact that people want to know, have you maintained a culture of safety, or have you, do you continue to improve your, product manufacturing processes so things don't happen like this? And it's okay to even proactively bring them up, in oftentimes maybe in a general sense rather than specific. But yes, not engaging never really works, and trying to cut it off without full engagement doesn't really ever work either. And so if a leader really internalizes something and makes positive change, that is a good message forever.
Thank you.
I'll just add one more little mantra that you can keep in mind, and that is, in the absence of information is speculation. And speculation is what we can't control. So that's what we want to be in control. We want to be in command of the narrative at all times. Any other questions or thoughts, reactions? Are you ready to become Chief Risk and Reputation Officers?
This is so great, Dave and Megan, and I feel like, especially after this crazy year plus that we've had, this is just so timely to really be able to think about what we've all experienced very individually and collectively in these terms. So thank you for bringing this to us. Again, the chat's open if you have any last questions, and also feel free to just unmute yourself. Let's see if anyone else has any. We have a couple more minutes. It's not looking like it. Well, with that, Dave and Megan, I just want to thank you so much from all of us at Spencer for joining us, for sharing your expertise with this group here. And to all the participants, thank you so much for being here and for your engagement in the chat and these awesome questions. We love to see your faces. We love to see these awesome questions coming in. So thank you so much for that energy. I want to invite you all to our the remainder of our series sessions. Next week, we will be having a session on Thursday, same time, same place. It's the 17th, and it will be entitled "Understanding the Carrier Value Proposition" with Dane Lopes and Tim Bunt with Everest Regroup. So I hope you'll join us for that and for sessions in the future if you can. Again, this session will be recorded. So if there's any tidbits of information you want to revisit, that will be on our website next week. And any other questions that you have for me or for Megan or Dave, you can feel free also to send them my way. You have my email address and I can forward those along as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, everybody.